I'm your host, Yuri Brita. We're here in the subscriber-only episode, continue our conversation with Dr. Samuel Frost, talking about full preterism. We want to go a little bit more in depth here in discussing some modern controversies, particularly surrounding Gary DeMar. Some of you who listen to Perspectivalists may know, I was one of the signers, together with Dr. Samuel Frost and a few other much more notable scholars than I, in really confronting Gary in some of the lack of, at the very least, I would say, Sam, the lack of clarity, which has now become much clearer now, because you can only go so far in not offering an objective stance in the position until we have an aha moment, realize, wait a minute, the reason you're not able to answer this here is because you truly don't believe it. And so essentially the letter asked Gary three particular questions that he refused to answer. Sam, just for our listeners, can you give us at least two or three of those questions that we asked Gary to answer in objective fashion?
Well, is there an end of history? Last day? Is there a bodily descent of the Lord, and then the finality of the bodily resurrection of the dead? And do you affirm these?
But so first of all, these are very straightforward questions.
It's Bible 101.
Bible 101. How did Gary respond?
He said at first he was going to answer. Now he's closer to, Brother Sandlin and others than he ever was with me. I wasn't personal friends with Gary. Gary was just an endorsement. We met a couple of times at full preterist conferences back in 2003 in North Carolina, but he had always maintained that he was not full preterist. So I didn't think anything else of it, because he's post-millennialists, and post-millennialists are not full preterists. They can't be by nature.
By nature, right?
Can't be. So he said he would respond, I guess, in private, and then he kind of just blew us off, I guess would be the best way, that he just didn't take seriously. We were being accusatory, and we just don't understand. You get all of that kind of stuff. Right. But the problem for me was that he was doing these podcasts with Kim Burgess. Kim Burgess is a hyper-preterist. Now all these guys have, even though I left the movement and I'm a target, I'm still friends with the majority of them on Facebook. Now, I've been on Facebook since 2008, way back, and I've spend a lot of time on Facebook because I value it, especially now over all these years. So a lot of these guys, just because I left the movement, I didn't leave keeping my finger on the pulse of what I had invested so much of my life in. I wanted to keep monitoring what was going on with it. It was imploding is what was happening. So Kim Burgess, I've known for, again, Facebook friends, but I've read his stuff and this, that, and the other. And he's a full preterist, and he's doing these very intimate podcasts with Gary. And I'm like, well, that, why is he doing that? Now, I know he had caught flack before going to full preterist conference, of which I spoke at one that he was at. That's when I first met him. But again, he was very clear. I had confronted him a couple of times, like, how can you endorse these guys, Don Preston and these other guys? Well, I just don't believe they're heretics. I don't believe that what they're saying is heresy. So he would never come out and condemn that. And I'm very, let's all get along kind of guy. And so I just wrote that off as that, because again, he published my book and he endorsed it. He published the first round with him and Joel McDermott, published it, endorsed it. Joel gave a glowing in his debate with Don Preston at the Open, and he holds the book up, and this one here, and he gives a glowing scholar. Sam Frost has written a fantastic book that refutes. Well, and then he goes on to debate Don Preston. So my signals are saying, he's not full preterist. He might be a 98% or all fulfilled, right. Whatever.
So maybe Revelation 21 and 22 or something.
The millennium is going to end. He's post-millennial. So
Right.
we're in the millennium and it's going to end. And so he can't, yeah, he's in error. I think he goes too far in his preterism. I would say probably too far, but he's not a full preterist. And I would always say that. But these last 4 months, Gary DeMar is a full preterist. There's no ands, ifs, or buts about it.
One of the
And
things you said before, Sam, by the way, just as an interruption, is that and one reason you know that so definitively is because the language he's using now is the same language you used to use when you were in the movement.
oh yeah, so Jason Bradfield, and I love brother Jason. He just was my sidekick for many years. Those formative years that we were putting together a full preterist church, congregation, and the whole thing, because we were riding a bit of a wave. And I came into full preterism through a post-millennial preterist route. So I kept that victory language. Christianity is going to be the only thing that rides everything out. So 10,000 years from now, you won't have any other religions. We'll be the only one left. And so we'll convert the world and do all this other stuff. And you can't have that in full preterism because everything is fulfilled. That might be an accidental kind of thing that happens, but it's not a fulfillment of any prophecy that all the nations will be blessed. That's nations going to heaven through Jesus Christ.
Right.
So you can't attach it to any of that kind of stuff. Well, we were trying to do that. We were trying to have ongoing fulfillment. Everything's fulfilled in 70 AD, but we'll use John Murray's redemption accomplished and applied. We'll use that as our template.
Yeah.
Say 70 AD, all prophecies is accomplished, and now we have to apply it. How does that work out in history in the future? And I'm going back and listening to these recent podcasts of Gary and Kim talking. I'm like, that's me and Jason. We were doing it back in 2004. He's doing the exact same thing.
They're
He's
kind of Johnny come lately.
Yeah, trying to have his cake full preterism and his icing evangelicalism too, and they don't mix. You can't put an evangelical icing over a full preterist cake.
When I
trying to hang on to both of those
right
things, and that it can't be done.
And what it shows in some ways, and I came to the sort of beginning of my interest in theology back in the late 90s. I remember you'd have these sort of special online groups where you had to enter a password, a code here in order to get to these secret groups. And I do remember a lot of these full preterist groups were a part of the early, in some ways they were kind of innovators in the sense that they used the media to kind of offer their, esoteric ideas about theology and how history is to unfold, or how history is not to unfold in this sense here. But when you look at the early days, what's interesting about what you're saying, at least at experiential level, is when you talk about thinking and playing through these themes, like working through John Murray's categories, what that says to me is just how novel it is that now, only 20, 30 years ago, you're thinking, how do I make my system coherent by borrowing modern categories, which truly shows just how new full preterism is as a system. I mean, I know it was,
you can go back
to, yeah. So it's, you're playing, it's almost like you're truly beginning a movement from scratch, which in my estimation screams cultish.
Yeah. That's a good point. Now, who I consider the father of modern full preterism would be Max King. 800-page Crossing the Parousia of Christ. It's just massive work. And I got to know King and his son, both of them, Doug and Tim, in Warren, Ohio. So spoke at their conferences. They liked my manuscript, misplaced hope, and published it. So we really built a kind of good relationship. And I, followed basically King's paradigm. So King was really the first one, because even Russell and the earlier preterists, they still saw the millennium as ending. They still had some sort of an end.
Right.
Even though, again, I call them the 98 percenters. 98% of the Bible's fulfilled, but there's still 2%. So, but Max said no, there's 100% is fulfilled. He took 1 Corinthians 15, that was fulfilled in 70 AD. That's the basic half of the first half is preterism. The second half is full preterism, is 800-page book. Where the Kings eventually went is to completely jettison the idea of preterism, the title full preterism, and they have now embraced this holistic Ken Wilber integral theology, universalism. God is the one consciousness of man that's bringing about the great consciousness of redemption throughout. And
wow.
Yeah, which I don't blame them. I flirted with that. Universalism, I thought maybe now 70 AD, that gives us all these universalists all along. They didn't have the eschatology, but now we do, and we've got the argument for truly universal kingdom, and everyone gets, we're all in. The whole world's in. God is renovating the world.
Right. And it seems like if you have a system where you are essentially rethinking classic categories of doctrine or credo statements, then it appears that there's room for, I'll use the word mystical, but also in some ways syncretistic, right? You can begin to dab into different ideas as a way of finding, because now the Bible becomes an open book where you say, if this is fulfilled in AD 70, if there's a spiritual resurrection in every sense, then we can begin to rethink our own fleshly experience.
Yes. Well, you just nailed it, because and I can remember in my mind reading this kind of literature, because again, as a scholar, you read. I read every, I read whatever I can get my hands on. So the Bible teaches us in the history of Israel, who codified God, put God in a box, created a religion, exclusive, us and them. That's what Israel is, us and them. And the lesson is, us and them do not work. God is a God of all. Paul understands this. And the eschaton of fulfilling the old covenant temple, that destruction of the temple, that becomes this all-embracive symbol that God is through with temples. He's through with church buildings. He's through with organizations that try to organize his name into a four-cornered square.
Right.
Stop doing. God's message through Jesus Christ is stop doing that. You are all my children. And I thought, boy, that's appealing. But my evangelical upbringing, I've been in church all my life. I think it's the Holy Spirit, that little voice in the back of your head saying, don't go there. I'm like, boy, but listen, truly it is alluring to want to go there. I recently read an article, I don't know if it was by Moeller or somewhere else in Christianity Today, where he was arguing and quoting where universalism would be great. On one little level trajectory, boy, that would relieve a lot of. On the other hand, it wouldn't be great, because it basically leaves an open. Everything is now open, so your ethics, morals, all that kind of stuff just kind of vanishes. And again, heaven becomes the goal. It'll never be realized on the earth, So there's a radical Gnostic strain in all of these attempts, and it's in Gary DeMar. I've heard it, and I'm like, that's Gnosticism. He's questioning resurrection of the body. Wait, I don't think he affirms resurrection of the body. I think he flat out said, when you die, we get new bodies when we go to heaven instantly. Oh, well, great. Then I'm just walking around in a meat sack right now. That's Platonism. That's flat out Plato. That's just, that's not Christianity. And what's the point? If Paul was preaching that, nobody really would have had much of a big giant problem with it.
Right.
But he wasn't preaching that. Because I've talked to enough agnostics and atheists in my day. That message doesn't bother them at all. Well, you die and you go to heaven. That's it. There's no confrontation with the world, no final showdown, no, you just die and you go, oh, well, that's harmless.
Yeah. It creates
but the Kings did leave, and that's where they're at. And I think they're consistent. I think that they got it.
Well, I'm always enticed by this conversation because I mean, sometimes, even though we share a Trinitarian faith with the Eastern Orthodoxy and Roman Catholics, as a Protestant, I'm always intrigued by the conversation, and that is that when you convert to something new, like say Eastern Orthodox, Roman Catholicism, from a Protestant standpoint, you bring a lot of Protestant presuppositions to it, which means that when you go into it, you go into it saying, no, I have a very, very high regard for the scriptures and its position and authority in this system. However, the more consistent you are in that universe, you realize that Orthodoxy and Catholicism place the role of tradition as a standard objective hermeneutic, practically speaking, at the same level of scriptures. My application of that is to the full preterist movement is that when you're entering that world, you still want to preserve some Protestant ideals, like the institution of the church, like the preservation of the Lord's Supper, because you still maintain a little bit of the Protestant bona fides. But I think consistently, as you carry on that movement, you begin to use the language you use, no pun intended, but to shed away the flesh of the Protestant world, or at least of the Orthodox position, because you realize that, ultimately, there's no biblical rationale to continue to have the Lord's Supper.
Not really.
Right?
Yeah, no, you show forth the Lord's death until he comes. We tried to get around this by saying, well, he's come, and so now we have his supper in the kingdom.
Right.
But I'm not going to have the Lord's table in the new heaven. Why? See, the traditional answer in the new heavens and the new earth, we won't be walking around with Bible translations arguing back. We're not going to have a, hey, are you called to be a pastor? That question will never come up in the new heavens and new earth.
I know there's a sense of, no, exactly. There's a sense of tedium, I think, for guys like Gary and others, when we talk about, they've even used this in a mockery tone. There's a tediousness about the idea that you will be in heaven in a soul form, awaiting for thousands of years until the body comes along and you are reincorporated, and just as heaven and earth become one, your body and soul becomes one in the new creation. Why is that the doctrine of the bodily resurrection of human beings, both who will be on earth at the coming of Jesus and who are in heaven? Now, why is that so significant for us?
The last several years, my thinking on bodily resurrection and what Paul meant by that, and in the theology in it, looking back on the way I was raised, I think, and maybe you can confirm or not confirm this, growing up in church, resurrection of the dead was just, it was given lip service and we believed it. It was something that was going to happen out there somewhere. It was like an icing on the cake or something.
Right.
But the real essentials is now. in your faith now and then dying and going to heaven. That's and going to church. Yeah, you're going to church. Those are the and cultivating an ethical, moral life.
Mm-hmm.
That's the focus. Resurrection is, the icing on the cake of a person who has done all of this. It's like some saying out here that view has gone away in my mind. I think we have woefully. We need a revival in the doctrine of what Paul said. I preach the hope of Israel, the resurrection of the dead. This is the reason why I am on trial.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
What is he saying there? If there is no resurrection of the dead, then whether you affirm it or not, Christ has not been raised.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Dr. Talbot helped me to see what Paul was saying there. He said he's not affirming. Paul's not saying you can believe that Jesus was raised from the dead, that you don't have to believe in the future. No, Paul's saying if you don't believe in a future bodily resurrection of the dead, then your view of Jesus raised from the dead, pointless.
Mm.
And I thought, we've not preached resurrection of the dead. But Paul, that's what he was. You can't go hardly a chapter without him mentioning the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and so shall also God raise you. It's like it's inseparable. And I think it's inseparable in terms of our soteriology, how we are to see ourselves, what we're heading towards, what we're destined. This is our destiny, immortality.
Mm-hmm.
That is the destiny that's already working in me now.
Yeah.
It has always been working the day Adam sinned.
Yeah.
That went right into effect. And my whole world on that has changed. So I think Gary is laboring under a very poor doctrine of resurrection of the dead, and he's taking, rightfully so, he's taking pot shots at it.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it really does. Yeah. It really does.
That's how I fell into it. I was like, this isn't really an important doctrine, bodily resurrection. What are you going to do with a dead body that died at sea 1,000 years ago? There's no body.
Right. And I think, both of us who kind of have some, liturgical church calendar sort of background, we see this. This is one reason I think a liturgical church is helpful in reinforcing these themes, because here we are, we're in the third, fourth week of Easter tide. And what are we talking about? We're talking about how the resurrection of Jesus on the third day has lasting effect on humanity onward. And so in a full preterist universe, Easter Sunday is like, it's just another day.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
Not for Paul. And we're getting ready to come into Ascension.
Yeah.
And I'm excited. I'm like,
me too.
This is the coming of the Lord on the clouds of heaven before the Father, receiving all power, glory, honor, and might, and given a rod to crush the nations, which is what he's been doing.
Yeah.
And you find Psalm 110, Psalm 2 preached by Paul. That's the most constantly referred to Psalms.
Absolutely.
Christ has come. Christ was come. Christ is come. Christ is the coming one. And I thought, that's Eucharist. Oh, that's Eucharist.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
his presence, but it's hidden. It's hidden, but it will be made manifest.
Yes.
Like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I need to go to church to fellowship with the body of Christ, because the Spirit is raising the dead. How do I know this? He's given us assurance through raising Jesus from the dead. I love Paul. He has therein set a day in which he will judge the world through a man, and he has given us assurance of this by raising him from the dead. So what was maybe a pipe dream of immortality, maybe, I don't know, where spirits go, maybe where maybe the dead will be, well, Jesus erases the whole argument and brings immortality to light and says, yes, there will be a resurrection of the dead in the last day, and it'll look just like this. This is what it's going to look like. Yeah. I think for Paul, he absorbed that and thought, this is not only a possibility, it's a reality. I will be raised from the dead and made immortal. and stand again before God to receive eternal inheritance, the cosmos and all that's in it, or eternal damnation.
Mm.
These things really, and it just turned my world around. I began to, years ago, begin to take seriously, living more seriously, of my making my calling and my election sure. It just turned, and all because of the doctrine of resurrection. So
Wow.
for me, to deny bodily resurrection is like, eat, drink, and be merry.
Yeah.
What? Who cares anymore? Why go to church? Don't even bother going to church.
Right. Right. Sam, lovely to speak with you about this important topic, and I appreciate your passion and your ministry on this issue. And there's certainly a very humbling tone when you were a prominent figure in the movement, and you left it for not the glory of self, but for the glory of Christ and His church. And I'm really grateful for your labor. So thanks for joining us in the Perspectivalist.
Thank you very much.